I could listen to that all day long. I just love that. That is the Rova Chuppah Nigun by Rabbi Shlomo Katz. How are you, my holy sisters and brothers? Let's light up the darkness. And who is going to be with us on this fine Monday as we kick off a new week? Well, we kicked it off yesterday. We also kicked off a new month yesterday, but it's a 2-day Rosh Chodesh, so we're still celebrating the beginning of this new Hebrew month of Cheshvan. Who is with us today? Yehudit Sobel says Erev Tov from Florence, South Carolina. Paula from Chicago. James from Indianapolis. Stephen from Dover. Rochelle from Modesto, Matt from Eau Claire, Pauline from Arkansas, Juanita from Atlanta, Harold from Oregon, Grace from Miami. If you're with us for the first time, let us know so we can welcome you. John from Michigan, Nancy from North Carolina, Enoch from Philadelphia, Michelle from the Midwest, Sarah from Arizona, Andrew from Pennsylvania, Pam from Nashville, Brandon I know is from Knoxville, and what just happened? It's weird, like sometimes it misbehaves. There we go. Anne from Merced, Patrice from St. George, Stephanie says Shalom Aleichem. Sylvia, wow, you singing. No, I'm just mouthing it along. Shlomo Katz is singing. Randy from Florida, Lucy from Rochester, Minnesota, Maggie Lynn Scott from Ostrander, Ohio. And currently watching the YouTube video of the podcast. We just released a podcast episode today. It's on YouTube. We haven't even posted it on the Facebook page yet. We're going to post that either tonight or tomorrow. But amazing conversation that I had with Rabbi Reuven Wolf about Mashiach. Who is the Jewish Messiah and when is he coming? We recorded that last year before COVID. I mean, it just seems like from another time and space. But it's a subject that a lot of people are very curious about, and you'll love that podcast episode. Where was I? It keeps hopping. John from Sedona, Kathleen from West Virginia, Leah from Fort Myers, Sylvia is enjoying herself, and Sammy says shalom from Dallas. Welcome, everybody. And Marasi is with us over there on the YouTube side. Great to have you all with us tonight. Okay, we're finally discussing a new Mishnah. We were on that, the extended discussions and digressions and really amazing teachings that came out of the first Mishnah here in chapter 6 of Tractate Eruvin, the third volume of the Talmud. We are today on page 70. What is going on here? Yeah, we're on page 70. Right, so that's Daf Ayin. And we're opening a new Mishnah. So this is the second Mishnah of chapter 6. Let's just get right into it. I'll read the Mishnah and we can break it down a little bit as we read it for the first time. So this is the second Mishnah in chapter 6 of Tractate Eruvin, and we're on Daf Ayin. That's page 70. Tractate Eruvin has about 105 pages, I believe. So we're getting there. We have about a month to go in Tractate Eruvin, and then we'll finally make a siyum on this tractate and move on to the next, which I think is Pesachim, right? Pretty sure. Pesachim. So we'll get into the laws of Pesach, and we'll be in those for quite a while. Perhaps, we'll get pretty close to Pesach in studying the laws of Pesach, of Passover. At any rate, the second Mishnah here in chapter 6. So we've been discussing, right, we've been talking about creating an eruv for a long time. That's what this tractate is all about. But in this chapter, we're discussing renouncing one's rights, right? So that a bunch of people formed an eruv, somebody forgot to join, he's going to restrict all of them from carrying in that courtyard because he has rights in the courtyard, but he didn't join the eruv. And as we saw, if two people share a courtyard and they don't have an eruv, right? So they can't carry objects on Shabbos from their house out to the courtyard, because even though it's a private courtyard, since there's two homes or more in that courtyard and multiple people have rights in that courtyard, it acquires a little bit of the character of a public domain. And you can't carry an object on Shabbos from your house, from the private domain for sure, your house is a private domain, out into this semi-public domain, which is the shared courtyard. But if you all join in an eruv, then you can carry. And then the issue is, well, what if somebody didn't join in the eruv, right? So now, if you didn't join in the eruv, it's back to the first situation. All the people who joined in the eruv, okay, they have one joint space, but they're sharing that courtyard with somebody who didn't join their eruv, and he's going to restrict all of them from carrying objects not only out of their houses into the courtyard or vice versa, but also carrying objects in the courtyard itself, picking them up, carrying them more than 4 cubits and placing down within that courtyard is going to be prohibited to everybody because there's somebody who didn't join the eruv, even if the rest of them did. However, that person, that Jew, if he's a Jew, a Gentile can't renounce his rights. With the Gentile, they need to rent his rights because he is not subject to the laws of Shabbos in the same way that the Jews are. But a Jew who didn't join the eruv on Shabbos may renounce his rights, right? He can give up his rights to his own property, as it were. So now he won't restrict the others. He won't be able to carry objects in and out of his house. As we'll see, he might be able to carry in the courtyard as their guest. We'll talk about that in a moment. But he's giving up his rights, and so now he doesn't restrict them anymore. So this idea, this concept of renouncing one's rights on Shabbos is important. We started to discuss that in the first Mishna, and we continue now. Mishna number 2 of chapter 6. If one of the residents of a courtyard forgot and did not participate in the eruv, so that's the situation we're talking about. He didn't participate in an eruv with the other residents before Shabbos, and on Shabbos, he renounced his rights in the courtyard to the other residents. So up until now, we've been talking about, okay, so in order for the eruv to work for the other people, they have an eruv, he didn't join it, now he's going to renounce his rights. Beautiful. This is the situation we've been talking about. We understand it. But what exactly happens when he renounces his rights? That's what we're going to look at in this Mishnah. So he renounced his rights in the courtyard to the other residents. Now his house is prohibited both to him who forgot to establish an eruv and to them, the other residents, to bring in objects from the courtyard to his house or to take them out from his house into the courtyard, right? So he didn't join the eruv. Now he renounced his rights. So it makes sense that people cannot carry objects from the courtyard into his house, nor from objects from his house out into the courtyard. He cannot do that. And they cannot do that. They can carry objects now throughout the courtyard, but not in and out of his house, the guy who didn't join the eruv. However, their houses are permitted both to them and to him for taking objects out into the courtyard and for bringing them in. So it makes sense. He's renounced his rights. That was the whole purpose of renouncing his rights. Now the eruv is working. He no longer restricts everybody else. So they can carry stuff out of their house and into the courtyard, or from the courtyard into their house and around the courtyard, etc. What's interesting is, and so can he. He can't carry stuff in and out of his house, but he can carry things in and out of their houses. And we're like, well, wait a minute. Didn't he renounce his rights to carry in the courtyard? How is it that he can also carry things as long as they're not his things? And the answer is, he no longer has rights in this courtyard, right? He gave up his rights, but he can sort of be their guest. He can be a guest of the other residents of the courtyard, so he can carry stuff in and out of their houses, just not his house. If they gave their rights in the courtyard to him, now this is interesting, right? So we know that if two people didn't make an eruv before Shabbos, actually we're not going to talk about that case, right? But we understand that he can give up his rights to them, right? But they, all the members of the eruv, can give up their rights to him. So there's only going to be one person who's a resident of the courtyard now, right? So that's how it works. Like if two people live in the courtyard and they didn't make an eruv, so there is no eruv, so one of them can renounce rights to the other, and now there's no eruv needed because it's like there's only one resident of the courtyard. And we know that if there's just one house in a courtyard, one house in a private courtyard, there's no need for an eruv. He can carry stuff in and out of his house because there's no other people who have rights in that courtyard. There is no semi-public domain. It's just purely a private domain. It's one courtyard, one house. If there were two houses and one gives up his rights to the other, we can even do that on Shabbos. We'll see. We'll talk about that. Then that person can carry. And now we're seeing also that even if a bunch of people did make an eruv so they can carry, they can all renounce their rights to this one guy who didn't join in the eruv. Now, he can carry and they cannot. If they gave away their rights in the courtyard to him, i.e., if they renounced their rights in his favor, he is permitted to carry from his house into the courtyard, but they are prohibited from doing so. So that's interesting. If one person forgot to join the eruv and now he renounces his rights, so he can't carry in and out of his house, but as the guest of the group, as it were, he can carry stuff of theirs in and out of their house, right? He can sort of just be their helper. But if they all renounce their rights in the courtyard, all the people who join the eruv renounce all of that in favor of this one guy, so now he can carry stuff in and out of his house, and you would think, and they can carry stuff in and out of his house, since it's like his house is the only one in the courtyard. But no, as we'll learn in the Gemara, one person can be a guest, kind of like this guest status of the five, but the five can't acquire this guest status of the one. That's too big a stretch for the sages, so they don't allow that. Second paragraph of the Mishnah. If two residents of the courtyard forgot to establish an eruv, and the others renounced their rights in the courtyard in their favor, they prohibit one another. So this is a situation like this, right? I got some new pens here. Okay. So it's like this. So there's 4 houses in the eruv. Okay. So let's say, so what happened here? If 2 residents forgot to establish an eruv and the others renounced their rights in the courtyard in their favor. Okay. So there is, let's say, this could go work one of 2 ways. There's no eruv. There's 4 houses in the courtyard and they never established an eruv before Shabbos began. If these 2 said, okay, we're going to renounce our rights, if all 3 said, we all renounce our rights to this guy, so that's going to work. He's going to be able to carry in and out. They are not. But if 2 houses say, well, we renounce our rights to 2 houses, like these 2 say, we renounce all our rights to these 2 houses. But if these 2 houses didn't establish an eruv, well, they restrict each other. So the fact that they renounce their rights to a group that restricts each other means that it doesn't work. What they renounce doesn't take hold. No one is, it's as if they did nothing because no one is allowed to carry. They didn't have an eruv, so 4 houses share this shared courtyard. It's like a semi-public space. Right now, no one can carry. if 3 houses renounce to 1 house, okay, this guy can carry, nobody else can, but at least one person can carry in and out of his house. That would work. If these 2 have made an eruv, and these 2 did not make an eruv, right? So these guys can renounce their rights to them, and then these 2, this is going to work. These 2 guys can't carry, these can. But if the ones who make an eruv renounce to the ones who didn't, it's not going to work because these 2 still restrict each other. Now, this Mishnah has got a lot of these kinds of combinations. If 1 renounces to 2, if 2 renounce to 1, if the ones who establish an eruv renounce to the ones who didn't establish an eruv, if the ones who didn't establish an eruv renounce their rights to the ones who did establish an eruv, it can get very confusing. And we almost, and you know, as I'm reading it, as I was studying it, as I'm telling it now, it's almost like we want to throw up our hands and say, all right, well, if I ever need to, you know, set up this eruv, I'll look up the chart, but I'm not going to be able to keep track of all these different combinations and permutations. That is a natural reaction to this. And so that's fine. So we do our best. We're just going to go through it. If you can't keep up with all the combinations, then you're like me. I couldn't keep up with all the combinations. But if you just kind of keep listening, after a while, the underlying principle starts to reveal itself. So just stay with it. Okay. So if 2 residents of the courtyard forgot to establish an eruv, and the others renounced their rights in the courtyard in their favor of the 2 who didn't create an eruv, well, those 2 prohibit one another. In this scenario, the courtyard would belong to both of them, but each individual house remains the domain of its owner, and it would therefore be prohibited for each of these residents to carry into the courtyard. So the grant was ineffective. One resident may give away and receive rights in a domain, but 2 residents may only give away rights. They may not receive, right? 2 residents can't receive rights as a joint recipient. You can only give your rights to one person. Although if a bunch of people formed an eruv and one person was left out, yes, he can give to all of them, but that's because they have an eruv. But you can't give rights to more than one person who didn't establish an eruv. Right, for one resident may give away and receive rights in a domain. 2 residents may only give away rights in a domain. They may not receive rights in a domain. Since they did not establish an eruv, it is unreasonable for the other residents of the courtyard to give away their rights in the domain, as the 2 who are prohibited because they didn't participate in the eruv render it prohibited for each other to carry. So why would you renounce rights to these 2? They can't carry. They don't have an eruv. It would be, it would be nonsensical to give rights to people who are not going to be permitted to carry after you renounce your rights to them. The third paragraph of the Mishnah poses a general question. When may one give away the rights in a domain, right? When do you renounce your rights in a domain? Beis Shammai say, while it is still day, i.e. before Shabbos begins. And Beis Hillel say, even after nightfall, when it is already Shabbos. And the law is going to follow Beis Hillel on this. You can renounce your rights on Shabbos. Beis Shammai were more stringent, and they say, no, you have to do the renouncing of rights before Shabbos begins because it's transactional in nature. Beis Hillel say you can do it after Shabbos begins because this is only according to a rabbinic decree, and there's no money changing hands. It's really only for the purpose of a mitzvah, and so we're going to allow it even after Shabbos begins. The Mishnah cites another dispute. If one gave away his rights in his courtyard to the other residents of the courtyard, renouncing them after having forgotten to establish an eruv with them on the previous day, and then he carried something out of his house into the courtyard, right? So what he renounced was his ability to do that. He renounced his rights in favor of the other ones, so at least they can carry. They established an eruv. They can carry in and out of their houses. He didn't join the eruv, so he can't carry in and out of his house until he renounces his rights. He restricts them from carrying in the courtyard too, because there's somebody in the shared courtyard who isn't part of the eruv, has rights to carry, and then restricts everybody. That's why he renounces his rights. But after he renounces his rights, if he then carries something into the courtyard, he's violated the rights that he's renounced. He's not allowed to do that. He's violated a rabbinic prohibition on carrying in and out of a shared courtyard if you didn't join an eruv. So now he violates that prohibition. We learned this at the end of yesterday, that this was the issue in that alleyway where the Sadducee, what if he renounced his rights, but then he carried, right? What happens then? So here, this Mishnah was cited in yesterday's daf. So if he does that, if he renounces his rights, but then he carries anyway, what is the result? According to Rabbi Meir, if he does it unwittingly or he does it intentionally, either way, the renunciation of rights is canceled because he's shown that he didn't really mean it when he renounced his rights because he then carried. And so now we go back to the situation where he didn't renounce his rights, so now he messed it up for everybody. Now, even though everybody else joined an eruv, he forgot to join the eruv, so he restricted them. He renounced his rights so that he wouldn't restrict them, but then he carried anyway, whether he did it by accident or on purpose. He messes it up for everybody, and now nobody can carry in the courtyard. That's according to Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says if he acted intentionally, he renders carrying prohibited for everybody. But if he does it unwittingly, he doesn't. The eruv is still good. And that makes sense because the idea is, why does his carrying, cancel the renunciation of his rights? Because it indicates that he didn't mean it when he renounced his rights. But that would only really work if he was intentional when he carried out into the courtyard, right? If he did it by accident, he just wasn't thinking about it, he forgot that he renounced his rights, and just without even thinking about it, he picked up something, carried it outside, he's like, oh no, whoops, I'm sorry. So he didn't mean to cancel the renunciation of his rights. It was an accident. So it doesn't mess it up for everybody. He violated a prohibition. He's guilty of that. That's on him. But he's not going to mess it up for everybody else if he did it accidentally. If he does it intentionally, then he's showing that, the heck with you guys, I don't care. And that's going to mess it up for everybody, and he's not a good neighbor. Okay, that is the Mishnah. Now let's get into the Gemaras that begin to open up this Mishnah and discussing it. Okay, so the Gemara says, when a person renounces rights, he does so in the courtyard and not in the house, right? Now we get that from the first part of the Mishnah, where it said that he gave up his rights in the courtyard, right? And now he's not allowed to carry stuff in and out of his house. But it also said that the other people who now have a valid eruv and they can carry in and out of their houses, they cannot carry stuff in and out of his house. Why? Because he retained his rights in his own house, right? He retained the rights in his own house, so that remains an area where carrying is going to be prohibited for everybody, even the people who are part of the eruv. Now, it doesn't have to be that way. He could, when he renounces his rights, he could say, I renounce my rights in the courtyard and my house. Right now, he at that point would not be allowed to carry objects in his own house. He would have to be like carry free for the rest of Shabbos. But if he did that, then the other people could carry stuff not only in and out of their houses and around the courtyard, but they could also carry stuff in and out of his house, the guy who didn't join the eruv, because he renounced all his rights, not just his right to the shared courtyard, but even inside the interior of his own house. However, when somebody says, I renounce my rights, and doesn't specify whether he means just in the courtyard or the courtyard and the house, we assume he means only the courtyard, because it would be abnormal to give up your rights to carry on Shabbos inside your own house. That would be that's unusual, it's unexpected. And so if the person doesn't specify, we assume he meant he only gives up his rights to carry in the courtyard. Gemara also says, when one renounces to a group who have established an eruv, he must renounce to each one of them. Right? So he's giving up his rights in that courtyard in favor of the group. But according to one ruling, he has to actually say to each of those people, I renounce my rights in the courtyard to you, and to you, and to you, and to you, and to all of them. Other authorities say it's enough that he just says, I renounce my rights to all of you. And he doesn't have to make that statement to each person. So there seems to be a ruling that goes each way on that question. Then we have a halacha. Okay. What happens? How does this law work? A group of people who established an eruv, they can renounce their rights in favor of another group who have also established an eruv. Right, so now there could be separate eruvs, right? What if there's 4 houses in the courtyard and 2 people, and it was like there was a plan to make an eruv, but what ended up happening is that the 2 people on the west side of the courtyard, they put some food into a joint basket and left it in one person's house, and then 2 people on the east side of the courtyard, 2 houses, they deposited some bread into a joint basket and left it in one of their houses, and they meant to bring over the food in that basket to the other side and all 4 join in one basket, but it ended up not happening. So there's actually 2 separate eruvs. Okay, so in that situation, 2 can give up their rights. 2 created an eruv can give up their rights to the other 2 who created an eruv. That works. So a group of people who established an eruv can renounce their rights in favor of another group who also established an eruv, but neither they nor an individual may do so in favor of a group that did not establish an eruv. And we saw that already. It makes sense. Why would you give up rights to a group that didn't create an eruv? You wouldn't have accomplished anything because they restrict each other. They can't carry because they don't have an eruv. A group can, or an individual can give up his rights to people who do have an eruv because they can carry. And now, now they've been restricted by the ones who didn't join or by the separate eruv issue. But now it's going to be, the rights are going to be consolidated either in an individual or a group that has an eruv. If the group renounces its rights in favor of an individual, or if an individual does so for another individual, the renouncing party is entirely prohibited from carrying in the courtyard and is not considered in this regard like a guest who is subordinate to his host and may carry wherever the latter may, right? So we saw that when an individual renounces his rights to a group, he can be like their guest and help them carry stuff in and out of their houses. But when a group or an individual renounces their rights in favor of an individual, they can't then go and be a guest of just that one person who is the only one left who can carry in the courtyard. They can't be his guests and carry stuff in and out of his house. It only works in terms of the guest status when one renounces his rights to a group that has an eruv established. Okay. If that's not complicated enough, if you're still with me, okay. Now here's the list. Like I said, don't feel like you have to memorize this list. It's impossible to keep track of all of this, but see if the underlying principle starts to emerge. Abaye raised an objection from a baraisa. One resident of a courtyard who did not establish an eruv may renounce his rights in the courtyard in favor of one who did establish an eruv. Now that's already a little bit like, what? What does it mean, one who established an eruv? Right? It takes more than one. One person by himself doesn't establish an eruv. If there's 2 residents in a courtyard, they didn't establish an eruv with each other, what would it mean that the one who didn't establish an eruv can renounce his rights to one who did establish an eruv? With whom did the second resident establish an eruv? Right? what kind of eruv is there? If there's two residents in the courtyard, one established, one didn't, with whom did that one establish? There's only two residents in this discussion. The answer is going to be, as we'll see, that actually there were three residents in the courtyard. One of them established his eruv with the other guy. The third one was left out, but the two who made an eruv together, one of them died during Shabbos. So now there's only two residents in the courtyard that are living. One entered into an eruv before Shabbos, but his partner died. The other didn't enter into an eruv, and we're going to see what happens in that situation. Two courtyard residents who established an eruv may also renounce their rights in the courtyard in favor of one who did not establish an eruv. And similarly, two courtyard residents who did not establish an eruv may renounce their rights in the courtyard in favor of two residents who did establish an eruv, or in favor of one resident who did not establish an eruv. Right? You can't give rights away to two who didn't establish an eruv, but you can give away the rights to one who did not establish an eruv. But one courtyard resident who did establish an eruv may not renounce his rights in the courtyard in favor of one resident who did not establish an eruv, nor may two residents who established an eruv renounce their rights in the courtyard in favor of two other residents who did not establish an eruv. We just talked about that. Nor may two residents who did not establish an eruv renounce their rights in the courtyard in favor of two residents who did not establish an eruv. Right? So two residents who did not establish an eruv can never receive renounced rights. Since they restrict each other, there's no point in receiving those rights. One who didn't renounce, one who didn't establish an eruv renounces to one who did. But aren't there only two people here? Actually, this is the case where there were three of them before Shabbos. Two of them entered into an eruv. The third stayed out of it, didn't join the eruv. After Shabbos started, the two who created the eruv, one of them died. And so if somebody wants to renounce his rights to that group who created the eruv, well, he can renounce his rights to one of them. He's still alive. But he can't renounce his rights to the other one who was part of that eruv because that person is dead. That person died on Shabbos. Obviously, it's a kind of morbid case, but we're trying to understand the underlying law. That's why they put this up as a hypothetical. What do you do in that situation? So the two who made the eruv may renounce to one who did not. Now, you might... No, I'm sorry. So that case where the one who died, we see, right, the one who did not establish an eruv may renounce his rights to the one who did. He established an eruv with somebody else, that person died, and so the one who didn't establish an eruv can renounce to this one who did, right? That was one of the things that it can be done. One resident of courtyard who did not establish an eruv may renounce his rights in favor of one who did. Okay, so that worked. Now, another situation. Two who made an eruv may renounce to one who did not. Now, you might think that the one who didn't establish an eruv should be penalized and not be allowed to receive the rights being renounced by people who did join in an eruv, right? Like maybe the sages might have decreed that, no, I mean, the people who went to the trouble of creating an eruv, they can't give up all those rights in favor of an individual who didn't join the eruv, maybe because he just forgot or he spaced or refused or whatever, for whatever reason he didn't join the eruv. But the sages do allow that. They did not decree against it. What's a situation where that might need to happen? Okay, the one guy, maybe he didn't join the eruv because, he was intending to do it. And then, he had an emergency on Friday and he was not able to join in. But everyone understands that he would have joined in. And then on Shabbos, he's got a bunch of guests coming over. In fact, maybe those people were going to be his guests at his house for Shabbos lunch. So even though they joined the eruv, they're going to say, okay, we renounce our rights. We give up our ability to carry. And you'll be the only one in this courtyard who can carry in and out of his house. But hey, you're our host for Shabbos lunch, so we're happy to renounce our rights, even though we created the eruv, to the one who didn't join the eruv, and that is permitted. And Even if there's and if there are a bunch of people in a courtyard and none of them made an eruv, all may renounce to one, right? So that's a simple case where there's 4 houses here. Nobody created an eruv. Can all of these people renounce their rights in the courtyard so that to one of them, so that it'll be as if there's only one house in this courtyard, only one has rights to carry? Yes, they may do that. We might have thought that we're not going to let, a whole group renounce their rights to a single individual, in order to penalize them for not being organized enough to create the eruv. They should have created the eruv. And by the way, they don't have to recreate the eruv every week. They could establish that eruv for the courtyard, with like some food that does not go bad, putting it in the communal basket, and that eruv can be good for a good long time. So you could think, well, they really want people to form these eruvs, to be in touch with their neighbors, get this whole situation organized. But, things happen, people move in and out, the eruv got ruined, it didn't get reestablished, the food expired, whatever, and it didn't happen. But now it's Shabbos, and they really need to carry stuff in and out of one house, so it is permitted that all of them renounce their rights to one of the houses. Now, with respect to the situation that we named a few minutes ago, that somebody was part of an eruv, or somebody was not part of an eruv. I'm sorry, somebody was not part of an eruv. There's a resident in the courtyard who did not join the eruv, and he dies, right? So one of the residents in the courtyard didn't join the eruv, so he restricts everybody from carrying because he makes that domain semi-public in that there's multiple people who have a legal right to be there, but this guy didn't join the eruv, so he restricts everyone from carrying. Then he dies. So he dies, but he was alive when Shabbos started. So he definitely restricts everybody from carrying. So then the first question is, well, if he dies during Shabbos, no one can carry while he's alive unless he renounces his rights. He didn't renounce his rights, and then he died. So does the fact that he's now dead, he doesn't exist in a sense, does that mean that he no longer restricts them? No, because when Shabbos began, they were restricted by this guy who didn't join the eruv or renounce his rights. And so since they were restricted at the beginning of Shabbos, there's a principle that they remain restricted during Shabbos until the rights are renounced. He died, so he can't renounce the rights. So the next question is, can his heir, the person who inherits his property, can the heir renounce the original rights on Shabbos? That's the question. May the one who died, may his heir renounce rights. We're getting toward the end of our discussion, so if you have comments or questions, good time to put them in the comments now. So, on the one hand, yesterday, before it was Shabbos, this person who now inherits, yesterday, right, the original resident was still alive. The heir was not the owner of any property, so he did not have the ability to join in the eruv, right? He didn't have a choice to join or not join the eruv. That was not a possibility for him. Similar to a non-Jew, right? A non-Jew can't join an eruv because the laws of Shabbos don't apply to the non-Jew. The laws of an eruv don't apply to a person who's not, don't apply within a courtyard to a person who's not a resident of that courtyard. So the heir yesterday was not a resident of the courtyard. He didn't own property in the courtyard. But now on Shabbos, the resident died and the heir now has rights in the courtyard. May he renounce those rights in order to permit everyone else to carry in the courtyard? So on the one hand, the answer is no, he can't renounce rights because we can't renounce rights unless we could originally have the ability to join in the eruv. Since he didn't have the ability to join in the eruv on Friday, he's going to be prohibited from renouncing his rights after his whatever, let's say his father died, and he inherits. He because he couldn't join the eruv on Friday, he can't renounce those rights which he just inherited on Saturday. He can't renounce them. That's one side of the argument. On the other hand, it might be that he can renounce those rights because even though he couldn't technically join in the eruv yesterday, he, the heir, is considered like the foot of his father. In other words, he comes into those rights as the foot of his father, and even though the father is gone, it's like they were always one unit. And so since the father could join the eruv yesterday and forgot to or chose not to, the father, if he were still alive today, could renounce those rights, and the son who inherits his property can also renounce those rights on Shabbos and allow everyone else to carry in the courtyard. That second view is the view of Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman says, yes, the heir may renounce rights. The people who disagree with Rav Nachman are the disciples of Shmuel. The disciples of Shmuel say, no, we have a principle that if something is permitted at the outset of Shabbos, it's permitted throughout Shabbos. And if something is prohibited at the outset of Shabbos, it's prohibited throughout Shabbos. The only exception to that is that the people who, join the eruv but have another resident in their courtyard who didn't join the eruv, they're all prohibited from carrying, but that status can change when he renounces his rights. He can renounce his rights on Shabbos, and then they become permitted to carry. But that's an exception to the general principle. So the heir who is not in a position to join an eruv or renounce rights at the outset of Shabbos, even though he inherits during Shabbos when his father dies, he doesn't, according to this view, he doesn't acquire the right to renounce his father's rights in the courtyard, and that's why he can't renounce those rights and render it permitted for everyone else to carry. And the precedent that is cited for that view is, let's say you have two courtyards that are next to each other, and there's an opening between them. Because there's an opening between them, that's what allows them to form a larger joint eruv between two courtyards, right? The two courtyards can join in a larger eruv that permits carrying not only in and out of the houses into each of the separate courtyards, but now people can carry between the courtyards as well. That's only possible if there's an opening between the courtyards. There has to be a door between the two courtyards. They have to be contiguous for you to be able to carry between the two courtyards and have a sort of master eruv between those two courtyards. So let's say they had that situation. There is an opening between the two courtyards. They created a joint eruv for the two courtyards, and then on Shabbos, something happens and blocks off the opening. Like that door gets closed and locked, or there's a collapse. Some rocks fall down and block up that opening, and now people can't pass between the courtyards. And they would not have been able to make that joint eruv if that doorway wasn't there at the outset of Shabbos. Now that it's blocked, does that mean that carrying is going to be prohibited throughout the courtyards? No, because it was permitted at the beginning of Shabbos, it remains permitted throughout Shabbos. Likewise, the very first thing we learned in Tractate Eruvin, when courtyards that all open into an alleyway, they can join in a master eruv, so that there's carrying going to be prohibited between all those courtyards that open into the alleyway and in the alleyway itself. But in addition to having the eruv with, collecting food from all the courtyards and depositing it somewhere so that they're all joined together in the eruv, you also have to make a visual marker at the entranceway of the alleyway so that everyone knows that this is an alley where all of the courtyards have joined in an eruv together, and carrying is permitted in that alley and between the courtyards because they created an eruv. And you shouldn't think that carrying is permitted in an alleyway on Shabbos just because you can. No, it's only possible in this situation because they joined in the eruv. What is the marker? A side post or a cross beam at the opening of the alleyway. What happens if during Shabbos the side post or the cross beam is removed? It falls down, it breaks, it's gone. Can they still carry in that alleyway? If that side post wasn't there at the beginning of Shabbos, even though they joined in the eruv, they would not be permitted to carry in the alleyway. But if the cross beam or the side post collapses on Shabbos, carrying remains permitted because it was permitted at the outset of Shabbos when the cross beam and the side post were there at the alleyway. Removing them during Shabbos doesn't ruin the status of that alleyway for carrying. And so, since whatever the condition is that exists at the beginning of Shabbos remains the condition during Shabbos, for this question of may the heir renounce the rights that he inherited during Shabbos, the disciples of Shmuel say no. Rav Nachman says no, despite that principle, the heir can renounce rights. He's like the foot of his father. What is the proof for that? How does Rav Nachman overcome the other argument? Tune in tomorrow. That's going to be continued on Daf Ayin Aleph, page 71, which we're going to be discussing tomorrow. All right, that's what I've got for us today. Let me check your comments and questions. Okay. James Roth, Baruch Hashem. What is the meaning of this word from your lead in the page? I explained and linked to Chabad page about it. You mean the Hebrew letters at the top, the bet and the hey? Baruch Hashem. Blessed is God. And we put that in the corner. Sometimes we'll write the initials. The Hebrew's escaping me right now, but sometimes people will put the initials there, Bet Samech Daled, and what that stands for is by the grace of God. Right, so it's either blessed is God or by the grace of God. We are what follows. I'm going to teach or I'm going to share information. A lot of people will write that at the beginning of any document, any printed matter where Torah is going to be exchanged. You're going to find that at the beginning of books. I don't know. I wasn't ready to answer this question, but. Like very often where there's where you'll find letters of approbation saying that the person who put this book together, it's a beautiful thing what he's done, and then for sure you'll see those initials at the top of the page. By the grace of God, we are very happy to say that this work is good work. So for instance, here in the Koran Talmud, I don't know if you can see it, but at the very top of this letter, there's that, bet, hey, bet, and it's like a quotation mark in between, but all that means, it's like an abbreviation. It's sort of like we use periods, they use quotation marks in Hebrew. And see right in the middle at the top there, I know it's out of focus, but, Baruch Hashem or by the grace of God, either way, just invoking God's blessing as we set out to learn together or to teach or to give a ruling of Torah law. Somebody asked yesterday if eruvs are important nowadays, and Nina gave the short answer, yes. Do you have anything you'd like to add? I mean, so these days, we don't rely very often on these courtyard eruvin, right? Of the members of a courtyard or the members of an apartment building joining together. The more typical case is a neighborhood eruv. Right, well, you'll surround an entire neighborhood or even a whole region of a city with a network of essentially cross beams and side posts, although very often it's made with fishing line that are strung from telephone poles or light posts, stringing them together. And then there's a sort of symbolic side post at the base of the telephone pole or the light pole. And it's usually like some black rubber, like something that it looks like black rubber that would surround cables, but there's no cables there. It's just like a piece of black rubber appended to that light pole. And then there's the fishing line at the top of the light pole connecting to another light pole or telephone pole that also has this symbolic signpost at the bottom. And then, using this network of basically partitions to make an enclosure around this whole area. So it's like one large courtyard. It's as if there's one large courtyard. And then you might ask, well, but did all the residents deposit some food in the basket? And the answer is no. But what happens is, some Jewish sort of authority in the region, some rabbinic authority or council, is essentially deputized as our agents to deposit some food somewhere on behalf of everybody in the neighborhood. And so that renders carrying prohibited throughout the neighborhood. So here in Los Angeles, we have a large eruv. And so, I can carry, my folded prayer shawl on Shabbos. Or if I wanted to, I could carry the keys to my house in my pocket. Some people don't hold by community eruvs. They think it hasn't been done properly, so they don't hold by the eruv. Some of those people will make little local eruvs around, for instance, on my street, a couple blocks north, there are a lot of duplexes and even quadplexes, like where there's 2 houses or 4 houses in a courtyard. And sometimes you'll see some wooden posts at the corners of the property and some fishing line around them. So they've delineated, that property is going to have an eruv around it, and it's marked so that people know. And the residents of that courtyard have deposited some food together, and at least they can carry around that property. But the people who don't hold by the eruv, very often, like if you see a Jewish man, an Orthodox, a religious Jewish man on Shabbos walking down the street wearing his prayer shawl, probably it's because he doesn't hold by the eruv, and so he can wear it. You can carry anything that you're wearing, but you can't carry something in your hand, and that's why he's not carrying the folded shawl. Rather, he's wearing it. Lucy Rom Johnson. So Sam prepared a great Shabbos meal for his neighbors, but he forgot to participate in the eruv. Now they can't come to his house, and he can't bring the food out. Well, they can come to his house. They can come to his house. He didn't join the eruv, so he can't carry things in and out of his house, and they can't carry things in and out of his house. But they can come to his house and eat. That's okay. So the neighbors give their rights to Sam. Now he can bring all the goodies out into the courtyard, and they can all have a party. Yes, that would work. That would work. They now renounce their rights, so they can't carry things in and out of their houses, and they can't carry things more than 4 cubits in the courtyard. But certainly he can set up a table and bring things out of his house now that he's the only one with rights in the courtyard, and they can all eat at the table and have a happy dinner party. You got it right, Lucy. Pam Simmons. I can understand why an individual would renounce his rights in favor of others, but in what situations would a group renounce their rights for an individual? So you probably asked that before I said the situation, right? Where it was like, there was a reason, right? I answered that question earlier. Okay, Nina had to go, so let me quickly check. Are there any other questions that came up? Let me see. Let me just read this. Okay, since the only one who could renounce the rights is the rightful owner of the property, if the father dies, then only the rightful heir can inherit the rightful ownership of the property, meaning only that particular heir and excluding some other heir, a younger sibling if he didn't inherit. Difficulty if the heir inherits the ability from his father to renounce, and then that heir did not, but of his own possess that ability, but on his own only possesses that ability, but he doesn't possess that ability on his own, only his father. It is complicated, but the question is not resolved yet, right? So Rav Nachman says the heir can renounce rights. Others argue with him, and they're going to keep bringing challenges to him. But I'll give you a preview of tomorrow. The law is going to end up with Rav Nachman. The heir can renounce rights. So the question is, how do we get there? How is Rav Nachman going to overcome all of these objections that are going to be thrown at him? A lot of arrows are coming at Rav Nachman. Let's see how he, overcomes those arguments tomorrow. Have a great night, my holy sisters and brothers.